So today I'm going to be focusing on who credible messengers are in protective security. This is a project that was funded by the National Counter-Terrorism and Security Office in the United Kingdom to look at their public vigilance social media campaigns. Now, the common view in research is that governments and security messengers are not trusted, or they're low in trust, and therefore should not really be used as credible messengers in communications, whether it is terrorism prevention all the way to reintegration communications. And across the board, there's been a preference for alternative messengers, or what we can call non-security messengers. For example, whether it's this people with lived experience, victims, former extremists, religious leaders, so on and so forth. Now, to be clear, I'm not dismissing this view. What I'm trying to say is that there has to be some more nuance on this debate. And I also want to clarify here, my focus is on the wider public. But nevertheless, it is important for us to consider it. Why? Why should we challenge this assumption that's dominated research and in policy? Now, a work that I was involved in with Daniel Kohler, who led the project, really challenged the idea that people with lived experience are intrinsically more credible messengers in counter-narratives and prevention space. In that research, we used experimental survey design to compare different messengers, police, formers, victims, and social workers. In not one case did we find in that experiment police messengers being less credible. In fact, in most cases, they were either more credible or equally credible than other messengers. So it really challenges this idea. It really introduced something that destabilized our assumptions there, or at least led us to think we need to explore this further. And I should just add, this was a UK sample and German sample as well. Now, the issue of credibility matters because it influences government communications campaigns. And we are seeing governments outsourcing communications to alternative messengers in this belief that police and security officials lack credibility and other messengers are more credible. But what if these messengers, or some of these messengers, in some contexts, are not credible or are relatively less credible, and as a consequence of this, are less persuasive? So in this project, we were tasked with looking at messenger credibility and protective security communications. We looked at the Protect UK campaign, which aims to raise public vigilance to terrorism in public spaces, including through a social media campaign. And in doing so, it aims to encourage, among other things, bystander reporting. It also aims to build trust in engagement with businesses as a key part of securing public spaces. In this campaign, they use alternative messengers to promote, such as local authorities and businesses. Now, we understand that credibility through 3 dimensions. I can go into this more if you really want. Expertise, competence, benevolence, and integrity. Research shows that these typically are correlated with more persuasive messengers. But I am really more interested and moved by the idea of expertise as the theoretical mechanism that explains credibility. So expertise in the subject matter and institutional affiliation to that policy area as well. And so with that in mind, and building on that research, I hypothesize that the security messengers will be more persuasive, more credible, and more persuasive in bystander reporting communications. Yeah. So we did a survey. The method we used was an experimental survey design. And again, this was funded by NACSO. There are 8 experiments that we do. I'm presenting one here. I'll hopefully have a bit of time to pull in some of the other experiments, just to give an idea of the sheer scale of this. Each survey, most surveys had 2,000 respondents from a UK representative sample. The one I'm looking at here had 4,000 in that sample. Now, essentially the way we wanted to do it was to give them a realistic message that the campaign used as well. So here, this is completely fabricated by I should just add, but we doctored these social media posts through the text as close as possible, but we needed to manipulate to ensure internal validity. We give respondents one of these social media posts. And what you can see here is counter-terrorism policing, and then others is just a regional police and a local council, local authority. The reason why, just to clarify and emphasise, we added local authority messengers here because the campaign's own internal findings were suggesting local authorities were more trusted and more credible, so they were pushing that a bit more. But they were also wanting to push businesses again because the salience of businesses in the campaign and the intuition or the qualitative research which suggested that they were more credible than counter-terrorism policing. And in this vignette we used Coventry Building Society Arena because they were one of the organisations that really posted this message. Obviously, we had to clean that up. Say, for example, 300 participants get one of these, and then asked to read it, and then they get asked to respond to the dependent variables of social media engagement and bystander reporting intentions, which we were interested in. So what this allows us to do is isolate the effects of the messenger on trust, credibility rather, and its persuasiveness. So here are the findings. This is a beautifully presented graph. It's not, it's terrible, but hopefully it helps communicate the findings. The line in the middle here is the counter-terrorism police. We hold that constant because we hypothesize they're the more credible messenger and we want to compare them. And also now they're the dominant messenger. At the time, they were one of many messengers the campaign was experimenting with. Anything to the left of that line is low credibility. Again, those 3 dimensions on an index scale. And what we can see here, 2 findings, local authority messenger is less credible. It is viewed as less credible than counter-terrorism policing messenger. Now, that was quite interesting for the campaign because, as I said, they were promoting that. They were not promoting them after these findings, and I'll show you why later. Also, when the social media post combines local authority messengers with counter-terrorism policing, it still has that negative effect. So essentially, the damage done by that low credibility messenger isn't recovered by having a high credibility messenger there, really. The business messenger, as you can see, is actually the same as counter-terrorism policing. It's statistically insignificant. There's no difference in credibility. And I'll come back to that because that was an interesting one. We didn't expect that. Here we have our dependent variables of bystander reporting intentions. This is based on a study by Pierce and colleagues, a really excellent study on bystander reporting intentions in public spaces, specifically trains. And we wanted to use this. Uncertain scenario is we give a prompt, we tell them they're in a nightclub or something similar, and they think that there's some suspicious behaviour. And then the more certain scenario, they're told they suspect something. What are you going to do? Okay. And then after that, we're asked, how likely are you to report these to the police? So I'll focus on the more certain scenario. And what we find is that low credibility passes through. It passes through indirectly, so we can see the effects are going to be bigger over a larger sample. But also it passes on directly. The local authority messenger makes people less likely to report terrorism that they suspect. So, and just to emphasize this, maybe not to over-egg it too much, but to emphasize this, that what you have here is in a scenario where you have the local authority messenger communicating public vigilance, asking the community to look out and be ready for terrorism and please to report to it. If in this scenario they go to an event and they suspect something that's suspicious and not right, so to speak, they're less likely to report that terrorism or that incident, sorry, than if they received the Counter-Terrorism police messenger. And you can see why the campaign changed that. So credibility matters. And we have to not assume that police, and counter-terrorism police specifically, are less credible and less persuasive. Again, I'm still not finding any evidence for this. So counter-terrorism police messengers consistently seen as more or equally credible or more persuasive than alternative messengers. This held with business audiences. We tested this with business leaders, small business and large business CEOs. And again, we thought the campaign thought that business leaders would be more moved by other messengers. Not at all. Counter-terrorism policing again. It also held with audiences in high conspiracy beliefs. People who are more likely to believe in conspiracy beliefs saw that the messengers is equally credible, or rather equally lacking in credibility. So there was no real difference between the messengers, the business messengers and counter-terrorism police. Also, following an attack, the messengers were, counter-terrorism police messengers' credibility held up. But, as I mentioned, business messengers were seen as equally credible, and this seemingly challenged our argument on that expertise drives credibility, or is a major factor in credibility. And I should have just add, in this policy area, because in different policy areas, you need different types of credibility. But what we thought about this, why this is explained, is that the messenger we use is a sports arena. They're directly relevant to the area of protective security. They're the ones doing the stop and search. So what we did was we did an additional experiment which looked at different types of businesses, retail business and a construction business. We wanted something completely irrelevant, and I had fun making up my own retail boutique social media post, probably too much. And what we found there was that those messengers were not credible. So what that showed, or was that suggest and gives credence to, is this idea that the more credible messengers are those ones that are relevant to the policy areas. And there were some gender dimensions there that was very interesting. So the messenger does matter here, but it's the ones that are more relevant, more expertise in the policy area. So what can we take from this? Counter-terrorism communications, they should include security messengers. Or at least they shouldn't exclude. We need to move away from this assumption that security messengers are toxic to communications. They're not necessarily, especially not in terms of public communications, in protective security, but also, as previous research has shown, in prevention. Or at least a mix. Campaigns should take an evidence-based approach to evaluating credibility of the messengers. We shouldn't be making this on assumption. Now, the Home Office recently, well, in the last year, developed a new policy, a new system, which was evidence-informed on how to assess which messengers are credible to use in your campaigns. And I think that's been interesting to watch in terms of their social media posts. I think taking a more serious and rigorous approach to identifying messengers and not necessarily assuming who has credibility is going to be key, especially when there's these consequences for things like bystander reporting. But there is space for alternative messengers in counter-terrorism communications. And I say this often in terms of former extremists, but even in protective security, we showed that in the terrorist attack scenario that we played out, when the counter-terrorism police get the blame for that attack, the business messenger avoided the hit to the credibility. So there is a space for credible messengers, especially when those messengers are similarly credible, like the sports arena one, again in this context of protective security. Thank you very much.